And welcome once again to AP European History. My name's Paul Sargent. Today we're going to be taking a look at 19th century socialism. And I say that like it's a bad word, but hey, we're going to treat everything even-handedly today. We're going to do a little tongue-in-cheek, so I hope you enjoy yourself. But to be honest, socialism is a pretty misunderstood and much maligned concept in America. Politicians, ordinary citizens, maybe even you, throw the word socialism around as an insult to stop people from arguing certain positions or just to try and win votes. And while I'm not here to tell you whether socialism is right or wrong, I am here to represent historians. And as an historian, it's my job to try to see the motivations and causes for the development of socialism in the 19th century. As for the results, well, we'll see some of those in future episodes. Before we get started, though, I have to emphasize one thing. European history is filled with ideas, and most of those ideas are attempts to improve the lives of people living on the continent. Sometimes ideas work, and sometimes they don't, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't keep trying to make the world a better place. So back to the socialist movement. We can divide the movement into three distinct phases. First, early or utopian socialism. Second, Marxist or revolutionary socialism. And finally, revisionist or evolutionary socialism. I want to give you all the terms because the writers of the AP exam may use any one of them. Don't worry though, we'll take them one at a time. Alexis de Tocqueville, the famous French student of American democracy, and if you took AP US history, you should know about him, once said, "Democracy extends the sphere of individual freedom. Socialism restricts it. Democracy attaches all possible value to each man. Socialism makes each man a mere agent, a mere number. Democracy and socialism have nothing in common but one word, equality. But notice the difference. While democracy seeks equality and liberty, socialism seeks equality in restraint and servitude." Now, I'm sure by this point in the year, you've done a lot of work in your AP European History class about point of view or bias, and there's really no question on where Tocqueville stands on this. He's totally against socialism. He's totally for democracy. But why? Why is it thrown around as such a bad thing? And where did it all get started anyway? Well, let's take a look. Okay, so earlier utopian socialism. As long as there's been social inequality, mankind has yearned for a better way. But the Industrial Revolution of the late 18th and early 19th centuries changed things greatly. As factories sprang up around Europe and people moved to increasingly crowded cities, there began to be a basic belief that laissez-faire capitalism created greed. Greed, combined with individualism, created social inequality. And this all sums it up. At the top of the capitalist ladder, there are people who rule. There's the church to fool you. There's the army to shoot at you. There's all of the rich to eat the stuff that you make. And then at the bottom, it's all on the back of the workers. So the people who became known as the early socialists sought a way to solve the problem of social inequality. Their ideas were to limit or abolish the ability to own private property, to create support structures for the poor. And their critics called them utopian socialists because the experiments they created ultimately failed. Many of them sought to establish model communities based on their ideas. Some called for scientists and engineers to work to create a perfect society. Some called for gender equality. In fact, Charles Fourier came up with the idea of abolishing marriage and having sexual freedom in order to free man. And some called for the expansion of voting rights to ensure equality. In order to test these ideas, closed societies of believers were formed, but none lasted very long. The ideas and basic beliefs, however, continued. Why? Well, it was especially appealing to the working classes. And it began to create a class consciousness, especially in France. And that led to the next development in socialist ideology. Now to phase two, Marxist or revolutionary socialism of the mid-19th century. Karl Marx is really known for two major written works, the Communist Manifesto that he wrote with Friedrich Engels, and Das Kapital, which Engels finished after Marx died. In the opening lines of the Communist Manifesto, Marx wrote, "The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles." And basically, he identified class difference as the identifying characteristic of the human experience. Looking back at the French Revolution and drawing off the methodology of the Enlightenment, Marx called for a scientific socialism rooted in historical law. Now, I know, another name for socialism, but don't let each term get you too confused. By scientific, he meant that there were patterns that existed in history that could be recognized, and those patterns moved towards an ultimate goal. In his world, Marx definitely saw the need for a change. Now, I should say here, if you're a Marxist, you might want to turn off the video here because I'm going to way oversimplify things, and you might get upset because I don't give total credit to everything he said. But for the purposes of a survey course, we can sum up his thinking a little bit like this. Human history is defined by class conflict, and wealth was the source of most of that conflict. The Industrial Revolution created a greater conflict than ever before because it divided humans into two classes, the bourgeoisie or capitalist, the upper class wealthy owners of business, and the proletariat or workers, who were lower class, poor, and able to sell only their labor for a wage. The bourgeoisie exploited the proletariat for ever-growing profits, and he felt this trend would create a revolutionary class consciousness among workers. There'd be a revolution much like that in France of 1789, and the result would be a classless communist society. Well, to put it mildly, Europe witnessed an increasing popularity of socialism after 1871. In Germany, the Social Democratic Party became extremely popular despite Bismarck's efforts to stop it. He engineered a social security system and passed anti-socialist laws. But despite that, the SPD, as it was known, became the largest party in the Reichstag, the German parliament, and the movement's popularity grew in other countries as well. This led to the creation of the First International. Marx believed that the socialist movement encompassed workers throughout Europe and transcended national borders. So he spent a lot of time trying to bring everyone together, holding regular meetings to prepare for the coming revolution. Ultimately, though, Marx's enthusiasm for violent workers' revolts frightened lots of people, and this led to the eventual collapse of the First International. But the movement and the ideas of Marx didn't die with him in 1883. They would go on to affect political thought until the modern day. This brings us to the next phase. Phase 3, Revisionist or Evolutionary Socialism in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Well, the collapse of the First International didn't sit well with some, so they created the aptly named, and they really thought about this for a long time, Second International in 1889, and kept it going until World War I. It was different from its predecessor in three key ways. One, it was a loose confederation of nationalist socialist parties, each working in its own country. Number two, they declared May Day as an International Workers' Day. It's a one-day strike which was planned and organized with marches and demonstrations. And three, it was less revolutionary and relied on existing political systems to get change. What this meant was that the new socialism favored gradual change through practical action. Increased suffrage led many people to see political participation as the best way to make change, and when it came, real change increased the movement's momentum. Add to that the improved standard of living for everyone that came with the Second Industrial Revolution, and the probability of a class revolution decreased dramatically. Look, it's easy to talk revolution and violence when times are bad, but when things like voting, elections, and protests are working, people tend to choose the peaceful way of doing things. It's great. No one gets arrested, no one gets killed, you go home at the end of the night, you kiss your wife, and you can still stand up and call yourself a successful socialist. Another factor that decreased the desire for revolution was the gradual acceptance of labor unions. Now, when I was in high school and history teachers started talking labor unions, I knew it was time to zone out for a while. They really aren't that exciting, but they drastically changed the economic landscape. So to save your sanity, and because this video is getting a little bit lengthy, I'll make this quick. Labor unions allowed people to come together to push for better treatment in the workplace. As they gained legal acceptance, they became less radical, focusing on three key things: more pay, shorter hours, and safer conditions. They got these things because of a thing called collective bargaining. This allowed all the workers in a factory or an industry to ask for improvements for all of them, which is much more effective than one person asking his boss for a raise. When employers refused to bargain, massive strikes pushed them to the table. So by the time World War I came around, the socialist movement had become mainstream, with nationalized socialist parties. Each had its own goals and tactics. The rise of patriotism and national indoctrination prevented a unified approach. And when World War I actually came, the parties supported countries, not the international brotherhood. So in conclusion, we have to review what we know about socialism. First of all, it's based on the belief that the wealth difference leads to social inequality. Society needs to be more equal and help the less fortunate. Secondly, the interpretations of socialism during the 19th century changed to meet the needs of the day. The early Utopian Socialists, they saw society as evil. They wanted to create isolated communities and get out of the whole system. Hey, Thomas More would have been proud. Marxists saw revolution as the inevitable answer to the problems of industrialization, and class conflict and all of that was what they talked about all the time. Then revisionists came along, and they really saw that gradual change through increased democracy and the political process could possibly work. So where does the story go from here? Well, like much else of European culture and thought, World War I was a major turning point. And we'll get to that soon enough. Today, socialism has been embraced by most of the West to varying degrees, including here in the United States. But still, socialism gets a bad name in politics. Winston Churchill, speaking in 1945, put it this way: "The inherent vice of capitalism is the unequal sharing of blessings. The inherent virtue of socialism is the equal sharing of miseries." Well, that about does it for our discussion of socialism here in the 19th century. If you enjoyed the video and you're learning something from this stuff, please subscribe, because that'll make sure that whenever I put new videos up, you'll be notified. And also leave a comment. Let me know what you think about this and any improvements you might see or any new topics that you want me to talk about. I hope this is helping you in your AP European History class. And until next time, I'm Paul Sargent. And thanks for watching.